What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. This is the Science Dispatch podcast. My name is Cameron English. That is Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. He can hold up peace signs. That is a fact. And if you are curious, we're both glad to be here. Chuck, how you doing this fine day?
I'm fine. Unfortunately, I'm not sure about California where you are, but where I am on the East Coast, it is definitely winter.
It's beautiful and frigid, and I love it. It feels like I'm in Lord of the Rings. And after a summer of 107-degree days where I'm just covered in back sweat and miserable, I quite enjoy this. It's a nice change of pace. I think I need to move to Scotland is basically what I'm saying
Okay.
here.
Well, it's Christmas time here, and as I said, and so we're in a rural area, but not really rural like you think about, say, the middle of Pennsylvania. So what I see on everybody's cars on the weekend is instead of deer trophy, they all have Christmas trees that they've cut down and are bringing back.
I see. The shtick out here is to literally put lights on your car.
Okay.
Which I find both tacky and obnoxious, but also difficult because it interferes with their turn signals. So you get a bad driver with Christmas lights on their car, and then you don't know if they're going left or right, and it makes it exciting in a way that I don't want driving to be.
Do they also have the cars with the reindeer antlers on them?
They do. It's not as common, but one correlates with the other, kind of like drug use, right?
Okay.
If you use one, you're more inclined to use another, kind of a thing.
I got it.
Speaking of transitions, we're talking about the opioid epidemic.
Oh God, that was boom.
I almost nailed it, and then I said opioid epidemic, which is
well, that's true to some degree too. It's the opioid epidemic.
We're talking about the opioid epidemic, fentanyl epidemic. Everyone's got their own terms. I'm getting really tired of it. You can't even call people drug users anymore because that's a whatever. Anyways, we're talking about, I guess, an alternative history or a revisionist history of the opioid epidemic. This is by a new contributor to the site named Dr. Lynn Webster. And it's called A Tale of Two Graphs, Why the Four-Phase Opioid Story Falls Apart. So here is Dr. Webster's summary. He writes, America's overdose crisis isn't the simple story we've been told for years. A new investigation reveals how two key graphs, one famous, one ignored, shift entirely the way we understand what happened, why deaths keep rising, and why current policies continue to fail. Okay, Chuck, so here's how I understand this. There's this sort of four-phase opioid epidemic. If you read any news story about the overdose crisis, if you watch Dope Sick on Hulu or Painkiller on Netflix, they all basically tell this kind of story, and it sort of goes with, in the late 1990s, there was this pharma company called Purdue.
The Great Satan.
The Great Satan. Yeah, curses upon them. They manufactured this potent opioid called OxyContin, and doctors were sort of useful idiots in this ploy, and they were overprescribing this drug to people who may have needed it, maybe they didn't need it, but they were prescribing way too much of it to too many people. We got a bunch of people hooked on this opioid. Then the drug was reformulated so it couldn't be crushed up and abused, or it was much more difficult to abuse. And as a result of that, you had people who had become hooked on it who then went to street heroin and eventually to street fentanyl, and now they're on to carfentanil and all these other really gnarly drugs that are killing people in one shot, because you have all of these they're opioid users, but they're naive to these harder drugs.
Well, and harder in the sense that it's a smaller therapeutic window between a safe dose and a lethal dose.
There you go. That's why you do a podcast with the physician. So it's basically it's a higher potency drug that they're just not prepared for, and it's killing them. And now here we are. Thank you, Purdue, for this epidemic. And I guess what Dr. Webster's trying to do here, and please fill in the gaps because you understand this better than I do. Basically what he's saying is that story is at best half of what happened. And there's so much more going on here. The story goes back longer in history, and he's trying to set the record straight. I think that's the gist of it. Maybe supply some more details for us.
Fair enough. So this is a perfect story for us because it's complicated, and we are masters of complication, if nothing else, on the podcast.
Yes, we are.
I think that the common story that the great Satan Purdue is the entire cause of the opioid crisis is a simplified storyline that played well on any number of dramas and any number of mainstream medias, but in court, when you look at the court filings, there are any number of other characters in the story. The distributors, the wholesalers of these drugs have all had to pay penalties for their involvement because they simply ignored red flag warnings when they send 400,000 doses of a drug to a town of 50 people. And these kinds of mistakes they made. But Dr. Webster's point is to talk about the involvement of the insurance companies in perpetuating the problem. And he points out that, and this is really much more germane to pain management, that to do good pain management, to care for the people that have chronic pain, requires an investment of time between the physician and the patient. And that is poorly remunerated at best. This is an ongoing fight that all of the cognitive doctors think primary care have with the procedural doctors think surgeons, and that procedural care is paid for far more generously than cognitive or thinking care. And a lot of the involvement in good pain management comes down to spending 30 or 40 or 50 minutes with a patient and working out a treatment plan and seeing how the previous weeks have gone and carried it out. And the insurance companies just didn't want to pay for this, so they started ratcheting down payments for this type and extent of care. And as a result, the cost of what I would call good pain management left a lot of people priced out of the market. And
so before you go on, I'm just curious. I'm thinking of stuff as you talk. Why were they allowed to do that? What was the dynamic going on that the insurance company could say, we'll cover a bottle of pills, but we're not going to cover another appointment with your physician so you understand how to use them safely? How did that develop?
It wasn't even so much saying we're not covering the appointment. The whole system of how we are paid is bizarre at best. And for people that are doing primary care, people that are earning their incomes primarily from seeing patients in the office rather than doing operations. Okay, for people in the office, there are 5 levels of care, and each are time-based. And so if you see a patient for 15 minutes, you get $35. If you see a patient for an hour, you get $125. And the insurance companies simply said, oh, we know that you're classifying this as a class 5 1-hour visit, but we're going to just pay you for a 25-minute visit. And so they just undercut the fees. Didn't matter to them whether it was about pain management or Crohn's disease or whatever it is. This was just their general approach to paying for that type of care. But it impacted patients with chronic pain to a greater degree, I think, than for other groups. Only if for no other reason that there's a lot of patients that have musculoskeletal injuries that result in having chronic pain problems that require ongoing care.
So would it have been more difficult to suss out the people who were genuine pain patients or them versus the people who were trying to scam the system? Because Dr. Webster at least implies that this was happening, right? There were people going to pain clinics who were saying, "Oh, my elbow, it's just killing me," and so talk about that if you would.
You can to some degree suss out some of them, and we put practices in place to look at it. For instance, the individual that goes to 2 or 3 doctors, or that fills 3 or 4 different prescriptions at one time. Those people are suspicious for doctor shopping and pill purchasing, and we've put measures in place for a physician to identify what kind of meds the patient has been getting over the last several weeks in the entire geographic area. You also have to have a system that records pharmaceutical purchases, not just at your local CVS, but at the CVS 50 miles away. Because if you're looking to buy pills, you figure out pretty quickly that you need to go to another city to make that purchase, and it won't show up for a while on the drug system. So we did put things in place to do that, and that's part of what McKesson and some of the other wholesalers were tagged for, is because these flags were coming up and they were not doing anything at all about them. But in any case, it does remain difficult to simply look at someone's pharmaceutical purchases and say, this person really has pain and this person does not. In addition, it's also difficult to sometimes separate out a physician doing good quality pain management from a guy that's running a pain mill. You can tell in part by the fact that somebody at the pain mill may process 100 people in a day through there versus a different pain management office that's seeing only 15 or 20. But there's always going to be some ambiguity in separating out these groups. But nobody was even making an effort.
It seems to me, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, that not everybody, but a lot of the people involved in this discussion, they don't want the real answer, because the real answer is messy, as you were saying a minute ago. It's not easy to solve, because in reality, based on what Dr. Webster's saying here, it seems like you could have a legitimate pain clinic that's trying to care for people that is being abused by some people. And then you have law enforcement who would, like one of the examples he gives is they would catch individuals trying to scam pills, and then they would effectively recruit these people to become spies against these clinics, like go in and try to get more medicine than they should. So they became witnesses in federal trials against doctors. And then you have, I don't know what you want to call it, but you have like the media activist complex that really wants to sell the Purdue bad narrative. And then you have my favorite people, my favorite punching bag are the drug legalization folks who basically want to say people are allowed to use whatever they want and there's no problem with it. And the only real problems start is when you try to restrict access to drugs, because that's when everybody dies. So based on what I'm trying to say here, you have all of these competing interests. They all have some truth on their side, but they're all taking slices that are the most helpful to their cause. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. This is back to the 7 or 8 blind men trying to describe the elephant, and everyone has their particular portion of the anatomy that they claim is the most critical in that discussion. It's interesting because I've had a lot of back and forth with Dr. Bloom, who's really been a big advocate for pain management on the website, in talking about any number of the physicians that have gone to jail over prescription of pain medications. And where I think we disagree is in understanding intent. And Josh says that if they're treating pain patients, in essence, there's good intent. But what I see in some instances is, first of all, a huge lack of documentation. They're just not completing the medical record in such a way that they're going to be on safe territory. If you write in the chart, I'm giving this particular drug at this particular dose for this particular time for these reasons, they can take you to court to discuss your reasons, but they can't take you to court to say you are acting as a seller of pills. And a lot of these cases, there's just no documentation of the medical thinking that goes behind it. So my experience has been, and I come from a surgical background, so we have to get an informed consent for the things that we do. And documenting in the chart our thinking is critical to protecting us from medical liability. So maybe there's a difference in our training from that, because you go to an internist and they don't go through a consent process to say, well, I think you have strep throat, so here's an antibiotic. That's in some senses a procedure too. Well, why doesn't have a consent form? I understand why it doesn't have a consent form, but I think it means that in some senses the primary care doctor is a little less obsessive about documenting their thinking, and that becomes important.
I'm just curious. Sorry to keep cutting you off, but does it have to do with the fact that they're generalists of a sort, right? Like they have to have a certain understanding of so many different things when they're treating someone, whereas with you, if you're like, I'm going to cut into you literally, and I have to monitor everything about that as a result. Is that what's going on, or is it not quite?
No,
right?
I don't think so. I think that it really comes down to the fact that when you talk about consent, is that surgeons have to get it, and internal medicine does not. You occasionally you'll see them to get a consent for a particularly toxic drug by an oncologist, but in general, when you think back of all your experiences seeing your doctor, when was the last time they gave you did an informed consent? They probably, which is not to say that they didn't discuss the risks and the benefits, but they just do not document it. It's not part of our training. I mean, let's be honest, medical school does not teach you a lot of things about the day-to-day practice of medicine. We pick that up on the job. And in a surgical setting where you get consents day in and day out, you develop a different conception of what that medical record must reflect.
Yeah. In my experience, it seems that the consent is implied by the fact that you showed up with a problem.
Yes, and interestingly enough, at some hospitals, that's it. That's it. For a long time, the fact that you showed up at Mass General was consent for them to do whatever they wanted.
Yeah, and I don't mean to sound cynical or skeptical. I that's generally true, right? Like if I show up with a rash on my back and I go, "Hey, what the hell is this, doc?" and he goes, "Oh, take 2 of these. Call me." Like often it is consent. I don't know what it is legally. Right. But if you're there with a problem,
there's an implication there that you're going to go along with the treatment. So I guess it's when you become invasive that things get a little questionable.
So one of the things that Dr. Webster mentions briefly, I don't think he spends too much time talking about this, but he says, and he cites some important data here. He says, overall, overdose deaths have risen on a smooth exponential curve since the late 1970s across all drugs, long before OxyContin ever appeared. Now, he doesn't say it in here, but I've seen Jeff Singer and some other folks who take a similar position to Dr. Bloom, that these deaths, they started and they continue to increase because they're typically called deaths of despair. You have people that are trying to adapt to a labor situation that's radically shifting. Their jobs are moving overseas. Yeah. There's family dynamics. Divorce is increasing. Marriage is decreasing. Like you have all of these social dynamics going on that are affecting people for the worse. And this goes a long way in explaining why certain parts of the population are abusing these drugs. And that often gets overlooked. I don't know why that is. What do you think?
Oh, I'm a big fan of that. That comes from a guy named Deaton, who's an economist. And he was the one to point out that these deaths of despair affected white middle-aged men far more than any of the other economic groups that he was looking at. And I think that if you go along with it, you can see how every generation will have things that can lead to despair. I think, this is probably a little bit edgy, but the fact that, you spend 4 years in college and then can't get a job, I think is starting to hit the younger generation quite a bit. They've acquired a lot of debt, and they don't have a great number of ways to pay for that. So there's, I don't know that it necessarily leads to depression, but it certainly leads to default and a lot of the other issues going on. I think that one of the other things that I think that Josh and Jeff Singer try to point out is that this is not a problem that came about because the doctors were overprescribing medications. Was there some of that going on? Yes. Were they led astray by the promises from Purdue that this was not a particularly addictive drug? Yes. But physician practices in terms of treating people with opioids has turned 180 degrees from the days when pain was the fifth vital sign. And you're hard pressed to get any opioids after surgery anymore. And if you do, you get them for 3 days, and then they cut you off. So that narrative is gone. And I like to, as I watch the current events and we see them blowing up ships in the Caribbean, that also speaks to the fact that it doesn't seem to be that our current opioid crisis is driven by physicians and their prescribing habits. Otherwise, they would, I guess, be blowing up clinics.
Yes. Yeah, that's good insight. Yeah, good thing we clamped down on the doctors, because now you only have to blow up half the boats. Right? This might be, as we wrap up here, this might be a little far afield, but I think it is related. There's a book I'm going back through again called The Quest for Community by Robert Nisbet, who was a sociologist. He's long deceased now. But there's been a lot of scholarship along the same lines. And the argument is basically as follows, that during the 20th century, you saw these rapid shifts in industrialization and globalization. You saw declines in religiosity. You saw declines in local community organizations. Like Robert Putnam's book is called Bowling Alone, for example. Yes. So all of these things that used to bond people together and give them a foundation. Why am I here? Why am I alive? Well, I'm here because I have children to raise, and I'm here because I have this job that produces something useful that my community values, et cetera, right? You got all of these things that help people together. And one of the things Nisbet points out in his book is that the therapy culture really exploded in the middle of the 20th century. So as these things declined, you saw more people starting to buy self-help books and starting to go to therapy, and you saw the rise of this whole culture, which we're inundated with now, right? You can see a therapist online thanks to BetterHelp or whatever that thing's called, right? And it's not bad. I'm not knocking therapy, because people do benefit from it. But I think it's telling that all of this exploded as these massive sociological changes were happening. And as part of that, you see the medicalization of stuff, right? People are going to SSRIs, they're going to antipsychotics, they're taking opioids. Like all of this stuff kind of goes together. I'm wondering if you have any opinion on that.
I think you've absolutely hit upon what's becoming more and more evident as an absolute truth, that our culture affects us in many more ways than simply we enjoy it or we don't enjoy it. And there has been a significant shift along any number of lines that have created a dissonance, an unease in us, and that in many instances, rather than do the hard work of understanding and resolving the problem or the impossible work of making the connections that you really need. And in this sense, I'm not talking necessarily about medical access so much as developing friends, developing community, that we've substituted Mother's Little Helper for that. I mean, we can go back to the Valley of the Dolls and the Rolling Stones, and and to my youth, to talk about how pills came to be a form of relief for something. There's another book, Against the Machine, that's out now that talks about the same kind of loss of community, and it's difficult to rebuild community. I mean, I have that conversation with my friends because oftentimes our children want us to move closer to them, but if we move closer to them, how are we going to find friends? It's difficult in your senior years when, I've said this times before on the podcast, when you don't have the rope line at school to meet other people. So living in a community, not a lot of people talk to your neighbors, or you don't like your neighbors, and so developing friendships, developing these connections has become increasingly more difficult in an age when there's no more Kiwanis and Elks and those or bowling at night.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It does exist, but you really have to seek it out because you're not born into it, right? Like if you just go out into the world, you have to go find those things, and sometimes it's difficult. Whereas like maybe in your generation, if you were born into a family, into a middle-class family, that stuff just would have been around you. It just would have been like a fact of your existence, and it's rapidly changed, and it helps explain a whole lot. So,
right. Here, fun fact is that back in the 20s and 30s, the distance between you and the person that became your spouse could be measured in blocks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And today it is measured in miles.
Yeah. Yeah. It's radical. What I really noticed is in my generation, online dating became the primary way that you met people, that you met a boyfriend or a girlfriend or your spouse. And I don't know if it's the top option now, but it's certainly up there. And I think that just speaks to the fact that we're so socially stunted that, going up to someone and starting a conversation is just like, you might as well ask me to go to war. Like, why why would I do that, right? Anyways, so like I said, that's pretty far afield, but I think it speaks to the sort of underlying dynamics that make this a real problem.
We've really gone quite a far afield from the two graphs that we're going to explain the opioid crisis.
Yeah, but I think here's why it's important, and we won't belabor this too long. But I think it's important because, especially when it comes to medicine and public health, we love very simple cause and effect relationships. The gold standard is studying things in isolation. Modifying one variable while you hold the others constant, and this is the purest of science. But you can't answer really key questions that way, as important as it is to do a clinical trial.
It works for physics. It does not work for biology, and it certainly doesn't work for us.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Well, as I said, we went far afield, but this is a good story. I think this is the sort of thing that just sort of reorients you, so you start looking in the right direction. You go, wait a minute, maybe Dopesick isn't telling me the whole story here.
Right, or if not the right direction, at least it broadens your viewpoint of what's really going on.
Yes. Yes. Well said, as always, Dr. Dinerstein. So once again, the story is called A Tale of Two Graphs, Why the Four-Phase Opioid Story Falls Apart. This is by Dr. Lynn Webster. That is at acsh.org. While you're there, go to the subscribe tab, punch in your email address. We'll send you the articles we publish. The ones that you read are usually the ones we talk about. Be sure to follow us on social. It's at acsh.org on X. I'm at CamJEnglish. Our colleague Anna Delaski hosts our ACSH Matter of Facts show on, it's not even a show, these little 1-minute videos that are super helpful.
It's her show.
It's her show, I guess you'd call it. Whatever the case, she does a great job. They're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, and also on YouTube. So go check out ACSH Matter of Facts, and we will be back next week. Thank you so much. Until then.